welcome. My name's Chris Cann with Harbour Insight, and with me I have Ben Pullinger. Ben is Chief Executive of ATEX Resources, which is focused on its Valeriano project in Chile, and this is part of a series of conversations we're having with Ben to find out what's been going on and what's to come. Ben, welcome.
Great to be here. How are you today?
I'm all right. I wanted to talk to you in this first conversation about Valeriano just more generally, but looking at those key project factors, I suppose you'd say, starting with where you are, the regional setting of the geology there, and the fact that you are essentially in the land of the giants.
And that's, we call it the Porphyries superhighway. When you look down the spine of the Andes, so like all the way from Bolivia, Peru, all the way through to Chile, these are where the supergiants are. And one of like the fundamental points about these supergiants is they typically occur in clusters. And that's something that we're starting to see play out at Valeriano. So like what we have is something that's pretty special already. We went from geological curiosity to world-class, knocking on the door of like world-class deposit in a very short amount of time with the discovery of Valeriano. Now we're looking around us. We've got Alenciro to the north. We think there might be a porphyry that's enriching the northern part of Valeriano between us and Alenciro, so like halfway between that property. We're seeing Codelco drilling up the road within 5 to 10 kilometers of the project at a project they have called El Torrente. And we have another bit of work that we want to do on another piece of ground that we have up there as well, on what we call our northern block. So when you factor all that together and you fast forward like 4 or 5 years of like big budget exploration, there really is the potential here to have this like cluster thesis play out. And what do these clusters look like? They look like Escondida, they look like Vicuña, they look like Collahuasi. These are the giant projects that make up huge potential production for copper in the future, and have been the backbone of copper production now. And I think this is, as we move to the next like 5 to 10 years of exploration, development, and advancement of the projects, that's what you'll see happen in this district.
And is it the same geology? Because you talked about the superhighway, but my understanding in Chile is there's 2 superhighways. There's one in the north, there's one in the south, and then you're essentially what is being defined almost as a link belt.
Correct.
I believe.
The gaps are,
Are the rocks the same?
So this is a very interesting one. I think the biggest difference here is your host rocks are dominated by rhyolites in this part of the world. And I think the conventional wisdom back in the day was that you needed the iron, you needed the andesite, you needed the green rocks to create these like giant alteration halos and to drop all this copper out of solution. But what we found is that the rhyolites actually less of an alteration signature, harder to find, and a little bit more subtle, but the metallurgy associated with the rhyolites is significantly better. Rhyolite, no iron, it's a high silica, low iron environment. Rock's really porous, so you think of it as a sponge. And so you get acrogranular chalcopyrite dropping out as far as the eye can see in every direction. And it makes a very, very clean concentrate with no deleterious elements. And I mean, that's honestly something that's incredibly exciting for the project, especially now that we've done 2 phases of metallurgical test work in which we can grind at 200 microns, recover 95% of the copper, 95% of the gold, probably recover a lot of that water as part of that as well, stack it pretty easily, and take a lot of like initial capex in terms of how much power and energy needs to go into recovering that copper out. And this is what we kind of think will play out at Alenciro, if there's something at El Torrente, and we see some of the stuff happening 50 kilometers down the road at La Fortuna. So this really is shaping up from a geology, timing perspective, right project, right commodity price, right environment, everything just to be something that could honestly be that next biggest copper production district in the world. And we have the crown jewel in it, yes.
You talked about the network that you were done. That is something that's really, really logical. Make sure that your rocks can actually be processed before you spend more money on finding more of these rocks.
Correct.
But it's not that common. So you've had some great results back. Have they talked to you about anything in terms of informing what you do going forward? Have they given you any other insight that you would have necessarily had that's informing how you go about your next phases of exploration?
I think when you look at kind of like the team and the board background here, you get a little bit of a sense of like our DNA and our philosophy. Like we, I think very early on, have recognized this is a project that can go all the way. This can and should ultimately get built and become a mine one day. And so what do? Along the way, you start to de-risk at every milestone, every point. You need to justify the investment that you want to make in next year's exploration. You want to show that you can de-risk as much as you can. So we've started the environmental baseline work. Around the area, we're kind of leading on the ESG front as well, being like very active in the communities. We're up in a lot of the environmental monitoring stuff, and we're doing the technical de-risking as well, a geotechnical perspective and a metallurgical perspective. And I think what we're seeing is that on all fronts, point to this project can continue to advance. On all fronts, this project continues to get better, especially when you look at the geotechnical and the metallurgical perspectives. That network produces what will be one of like the highest quality cons in the world. They're like 30% to 33% copper, 8 to 12 grams per ton gold, can go everywhere. Very like negligible negligible impurities, and something that the world needs right now.
Okay. Before you mentioned knocking on the door of world class, what does that look like in your head or in the management team's head?
So look, I think what's really interesting is like how much the project has evolved from that 2023 resource, which is predicated on 3 fingers of intrusive, 300 million tons of intrusives informing a 1.4 billion ton resource at a 0.4 cutoff, right? And that gave us 1.4 billion tons, 0.67% copper equivalent. And that was based on recoveries, assumed recoveries at that point, because we hadn't done the test work, of 90% for copper and 70% for gold. Fast forward to phase 4 and phase 5, and what we've seen is that that envelope gets bigger. So the outer shape, we've got way more inventory to draw from, and I think we're probably sitting in something that's 2 to 3 billion tons right now. The grade of just about every hole that we've put into phase 4 and phase 5, and the average grade of those intervals is higher grade than the average grade of the resource was in 2024, after phase 3. And then we started to look at kind of like these higher grade like discoveries or higher grade trends that are evolving within that as well. So we've seen probably 2 to 3, 400 million tons in a much more cohesive of 1 to 1% copper equivalent mineralization, in a much more cohesive intrusive. So we've gone from having those like 3 fingers of 300 million tons to a volume now that's like knocking on 1 billion tons at probably reasonable grade as well. And then we've discovered these breccias in this enrichment zone on the north. So what I think, when you put that all together, what does it all mean? And I think you're looking at something now that once you start to get above 30 billion pounds of copper equivalent in the ground, you're starting to get up into that world-class project. And I think we're probably going to be pretty close, if not there, on this next resource update, and it's going to be a big milestone for us.
When's the resource update coming out?
We're hoping to have it in the back end of this year. All things going well, September, October.
Okay. You've touched on the breccia material. It's higher grade. What does that mean in terms of how you approach the project, given that one of the big issues that a lot of porphyries have this kind of project, particularly in this part of the world, is lower grades and operating at depth. So what does the breccia and that higher grade envelope mean in terms of how you approach the deposit?
The short answer is it's a total game changer. Like, I think you're not wrong. Like, I think if you looked at this project a year ago, we're looking at something that was well on its way to 2 billion tons at a decent grade. And it was really just the porphyry. And the challenge with these projects, they're spectacular projects. Once you get them out of the ground, these are 100 to 200 year projects, right? So let's just think about it. This can produce at 10 million to 20 million tons per annum for 100 to 200 years based on current inventory that we have right now. But that's a lot of capital that goes into that. It takes a little while to put all in the development, and everything basically has to go in before you turn it on. And it's a long time between start and that initial cash flow. The breccias do for us, especially because they sit on top of the porphyry, and we're actually kind of trying to chase them up to the valley floor. The valley floor sits at 3,800 meters. We've currently got them. We've currently got them projected to like 36, 37. So we're getting close to that valley floor, in which place you can imagine, a tunnel goes straight into this, define it, get underneath it, and start to mine. But what that grade does, to put it in kind of dollars and cents, is it supercharges the development of this. Now you don't need to wait 10 years to start to get your capital back after you've spent all the time putting in all your infrastructure. Now you're looking at something that, based on the comparative work that we've done around the world, you can build a 3 to 5 million ton per annum long hole open stoping exercise on this. 2% copper equivalent rock is about $200 in situ value, give or take. Your average mining cost for an operation like this around the world is $60 to $70. So you can really start to see like why this acts as a supercharger and is really a game changer. And that's just based on us, waving our arms around a volume that could be around 30 to 50 million tons right now. That would have a $10 billion in situ value. If you go back to those numbers and you just call it $100 off the royalties and payables and all that kind of stuff, you're kicking off $500 million a year in free cash flow. You can pay that initial starter mine back in 1 to 2 years, and then start to reinvest that capital into the bigger show, like the 100 to 200 year project. And that's where this gets really exciting. And I think beyond that now, we've got sufficient evidence that suggests that there's another porphyry that we talked about that's in between us and El Encierro. Why do we think that? Well, we're seeing enrichment of structures. We're seeing chalcopyrite be upgraded to bornite. We're seeing these structures being very like elevated in grade, going from like 1% copper equivalent to 2-3% over significant widths. We've now been able to trace it down in hole 25A, 1,000 meters below the breccia. We hit just over 30 meters at 4.5%. All along that northern corridor. So we can make a very strong case right now that we're seeing enrichment of a fluid system that's overprinting and enriching the Valeriano porphyry that comes from somewhere else. When you look at the mag signature of these, some magnetite-rich fluids, so you get a very good mag response. And we're drilling one of 4 of these things that have shown up, these targets that have shown up. So if that that $500 million a year scenario plays out on one of these, what is the potential if we can hit on another one or another one or another? All of a sudden, you're looking at something that has the potential not just to bring Valeriano out of the ground, but has the potential to unlock this district and be the catalyst for consolidation. Because if you take El Encierro, you assume El Encierro is similar to Valeriano, it has the same size, double that up, so that's 5 billion tons in resource inventory right now. Add in another porphyry in the middle. Codelco gets lucky at El Torrente and they find something there. We find something in the northern block. All of a sudden, you're looking at a center of gravity that can share all the same infrastructure, all within 10 kilometers, that can be phased into production, but becomes one of the biggest copper-producing districts on the planet. And that would be the dream for this area and this project.
You touched on something there, which I think is the driving point of what we're talking about here, around that higher grade and getting things moving.
And the power of it, yeah.
For the link belt and having that, as you call it, the center of gravity. I really don't understand how the topography plays into that. For me, kind of looking at the numbers, and treat me like a Labrador, but it's deep. You look at some of the really big intercepts are over huge widths, but it looks deep. And I understand the topography actually makes that a lot easier, but I don't understand it. Can you explain it?
So I'll start with an anecdote, a story. Like earlier this year, we had the privilege, thanks to one of our board members, to actually go and see what this looks like in reality. We went to underground at El Teniente. El Teniente, the world's biggest underground copper mine. It's been in production for 120 years. It has reserves 140 years out ahead of it. What blew my mind there is it has 4,500 kilometers of underground tunnels, 12-kilometer long tunnel linking the mine to the processing facility. And I'll come back to why that's important later on, because there's another very important thing as well. It has like less than 40 people underground right now. It used to have 4,000. It's being run remotely. Mining is not like what we used to think of it, where there's thousands of people on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. Mining can be done remotely now using technology. It's not that it can be done, it has been done already. El Teniente is a fully automated mine that's still automating more and automating the mill and stuff, but it can be done today. So fast forward what that looks like with a few more technological advancements for Valeriano. This becomes so much more achievable than I thought I even realized. So then the game is like look around the valleys, find the lowest point that you can put your infrastructure at. You create an access tunnel from there, similar to what you see at El Teniente, where you have that 12-kilometer train tunnel that basically takes ore from the mine to the mill. Find a place where you can put something like that in. And all of a sudden, this is no longer an altitude game. This is just a logistics and tunneling exercise. And you start with the smaller mine up top, move your material down to that. And this is all very conceptual, but what I'm outlining here is the blueprint for how this is done in other projects, and how this becomes achievable, and how all the challenges that you're talking about are surmountable. And especially in a world in which you don't have to have 100 people driving trucks underground anymore. Like, this is very exciting for the future of mining.
I think my takeaway from that, the main part is it has been done before.
It's
not something that you're trying to invent, which is the important thing. We'll try and organise some B-roll footage, I think, just to overlay this part, because some of it sounds really exciting, but I'm still not 100% clear in my head.
So yeah, so the concept is you take the topography and you turn it to your advantage, right? So you figure out where within like a feasible distance you can get that, you can find place to put all your infrastructure down to below 3,000 meters, for example, right? You find that place, you see where, you figure out how you can put a tunnel or access from, and this is something that again, this is gonna be this is pie in the sky right now, this is big picture conceptual, but imagine conceptual thinking. Imagine you have one tunnel that goes into this area, and you can access access El Encierro like other projects, the other Porphyry and Valeriano, all from one set of infrastructure, and that feeds a mill that's sitting at 2,500 meters and the camps at 2,500 meters, and then you've got workers staying in other places. Like that's kind of like where I think this goes in the future. Obviously, this is the way it's done in other places, and this is, like, as you said, this is doable. It has been done. We're not reinventing. One of the things I like about this project is we're not inventing anything for this project. We've seen how this gets mechanized. We've seen this flow sheet that would be derived, has been derived from our network in production in other places in the world. This works. This project works on conventional and in the money, off the shelf kind of best mining practices that are being implemented right now.
Okay, that's clearer. The other risk that I wanted to ask you about was just that question of scale. We have seen in the past really large projects over large footprints with the complexities of geology that often come with that. There are opportunities to get things wrong, and you get things wrong at this point, and that carries through for a life of mine. And as you say, these things can be very expensive if these mistakes are carried through over decades. Potentially, will have to be reversed. What kind of confidence have you got in your numbers and what you're pulling together so far that you're basing this picture on?
I mean, honestly, like, one of the things I love about Porphyries, they are the king of deposits. Like, you get the full range, you get the high grade stuff up top, you get this consistent ore body, and Valeriano is a little bit special again because of the consistency of the grade profile within it. So, it's not like a vein where you're trying to like estimate, you got grade here, and you're trying to work out the ideal drill spacing and trying to estimate the continuity of gold. Like, this thing is so continuous that it's, like, the numbers are very easy. Like, it's just, like you said, it's a scale thing. Going back to like the complexity that scale brings, like, we've seen it. We've seen big capital blowouts in the market, and like this is not my area of expertise, but what I think I get comfort from here is I see copper, especially new projects, are moving more forward as like on a consolidated and a consortium basis. We've seen Lundin and BHP come together to figure out a development plan for Vicuña. We've seen Andina and Los Bronces come together, so Codelco and Anglo, on, again, legacy assets that are being next to each other, because, again, clusters. Legacy assets that are being next to each other, being operated by two different operators, now putting them together and sharing a mine plan for 50 years. We've seen QB2 partner up with Codelco. So I think what you're seeing is on districts and clusters like this, I mean, Escondida's got 5 people involved. It's a consortium business where nobody takes that single asset capital risk. Everyone brings something to the table, and this is the way these districts should be developed. And I think that's how you mitigate that. Obviously, you mitigate that with grade as well. You have something small, like I said, you have these like the small, like, high grade kind of like breccia style, like long hole open stoping mines that generate cash flow. So again, you're not sitting paying back interest or taking out debt. Then it's like you have a big slug of de-risked capital that comes out of an existing small operation that then scales up. And I think when you start to look at it that way, this becomes all the more doable and all the more compelling.
It's obviously about exploration, but you've talked about Valeriano as the project area and how that's evolved with the fingers, and then obviously with the breccia material there, introducing that higher grade. But there are other deposits that are in the portfolio that are nearby.
Yeah.
They're big programs, and these holes are deep holes. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
How are you prioritizing things at the moment in phase 5 that you're into now, and where are you going to start bringing in some of these more proximal opportunities?
Yeah, so I think phase 4 and phase 5 both have been transformative in their own way, right? Again, phase 3, proof of concept, got that first resource out, realized that this has the scale. Like, we didn't hit the edges of the system. We realized that in phase 4 that, we moved away from these, like the 3-finger model, that the continuity of mineralization was even better than we thought of it before, and the continuity of the intrusive system driving mineralization into the wall rocks and was way bigger, and we still didn't hit the edges of that. Now in phase 5, last hole, phase 4, we hit the 68 meters at 2.02%, and that really kind of set the cat amongst the pigeons and very much said that there's something special happening here. Phase 5, we've now confirmed that and now have like added on. Again, this is indicative, like, the best projects always get better the more you drill them. And that's what we see here. So now phase 5, we were discovering this enrichment. This thesis that we've had for a while now that there's got to be something else out there, is we're starting to see more and more evidence of it. seeing something that's pumping fluid down old existing structures, upgrading that mineralization, upgrading the grade along the contact of the porphyry of the north. We don't know what that all means yet, but we're seeing it. We're hitting it consistently, and it's making the project better. So now we're going to have to think forward to phase 6 and phase 7. Now it's not only about what we have at Valeriano. It's like, if there's another porphyry there, okay, so we can maybe double the porphyry resource. Maybe there's 4 of these potential targets, and maybe if we can find another 2 or 3 of these breccias, that changes everything as well. But in terms of what this looks like and how this ultimately becomes the key, Valeriano becomes the key to unlocking this district, is we might not have yet found the best part of this deposit. For me, that's incredibly exciting, because the potential there is we have something right now that is special. What else can we add to this? And that really is going to be the focus in the next phases of exploration, is how much more of this high grade material can we find? How much better can we understand the structural controls and the fluid pathways that lead to enrichment? And what does that mean for the bigger picture? And I think it means, more volume, more optionality, more grade, and hopefully more high grade discoveries.
And that's what the market should be looking out for over the next, say, 18, 24 months. You've mentioned the resource, hopefully by the end of the year, that next significant upgrade there. We've talked previously about economic studies and starting to have a look at what it might look like to build. Obviously, you've kind of conceptualized it, but Absolutely. Is it still the case you're not interested in actually trying to wrap your arms around an economic idea until you've wrapped your arms around the actual deposit?
I think what we're doing, which is actually I think the right way to do this, is we're upgrading all of our environmental monitoring. We're doing all the things. We're bringing in geotechnical engineers every year to make sure that we collect the right data and to make sure that the data still speaks to something that can be a mine, right? We're continually to increase our understanding of the metallurgical processes and the ultimate flow sheet. So we're de-risking and doing all the studies that ultimately would fit into an economic study. But we wouldn't commit to an economic study until we're confident that we know where the heart of the system is, until we find where that cash flow engine and where the best part of it is, because you need to know where the best part is, because that part, that's the higher grade bit that's going to really generate the cash flow that pays for everything. So once we know where that is, then we'll start to wrap this all up and put a bow in it and call it an economic study. But it doesn't mean in the background that we're not advancing all of those component pieces to make sure that the project is served well as we move forward.
And in phase 5 at the moment, has that finished, or when does that finish? That will be the last piece of drilling that's done before the resource. Right. And the final question in this little cluster of questions, what are you looking for out of that besides just the evidence that you need to finish off and upgrade the resource, in terms of the structure and a lot of the defining parts of the deposit that might dictate where phase 6 takes you?
Yeah, so right now the takeaway is we need to do more work on the structural components and understand that fluid plan. We actually have people coming into site next week to start looking at this stuff and also help us with how we think about it, because that structural setting and those fluid pathways are way more important than I think we initially thought, especially for the high grade mineralization and kind of tracing that all up. We've got about a month or so, month to 2 months left of drilling, weather dependent. And so we can knock out a few more holes there. We've got a bunch more holes still to come out. So I think you'll see news flow in terms of the results all the way through June, July, maybe into August. September would be a great time if we can nail that deadline. A great time to get this resource out. We've got our resource geos coming up to site next week. We're moving all these things forward in the background. And what I hope we see out of this is a step change in the way that Valeriano is perceived versus where we were from our first resource. That this project is different, it's getting better, and anybody that hasn't been paying attention to the results and what we've putting together, we're blown away at how far this project has moved, and be able to table a resource that firmly puts us, if not in, then as close as possible that 30 billion pound copper equivalents in the ground. Kind of like top 10 undeveloped copper project, but with the grade to make it compelling as well. And if we don't get there in this program, we'll have more than enough runway to get there in phase 6, considering that we've got like 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers of geophysical anomalies and conceptual geology that we need to follow up on. That ultimately fingerprints where that overprinting system is and where we can find more of these breccias. We might still be able to double what we have here.
There are other things that I want to ask you about, Ben, but I'm going to call this one there. Thanks for speaking with us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chris.